Hi, I'm Kathryn.
And I'm Theresa.
And we are the co-authors of the book, Pass the Baton, Empowering All Music Students.
Our goal is to share stories of educators who are passing the baton and empowering their music students. We want to help teachers create music lessons that transform students from passive consumers to vibrant creatives. Welcome back to the Pass the Baton podcast. We're here to talk about all things student empowerment in music education. Before we introduce today's guest, we want to remind you to follow or subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes.
In addition, if you like what you hear today, please consider leaving a rating or review. That's what helps podcasts like Pass the Baton grow. So today was great, right?
It was. I had such a good time talking to David. You've had the opportunity to see him speak. I've seen him on social media. We've interacted. But it's always such a special occurrence when we get to have an actual conversation.
Yeah, it really is. And it's nice to hear. I feel like you spoke about find the thing that you're passionate about. And that's kind of your way into this work. Like for him, it was composing. For me, it was it was a bunch of things, but part of it was like trying a genius hour, right? Like you try things that change your instruction, change the learner experience, and then learn from it, and how can you use those strategies to empower your students, and change the experience.
Yep. Doing that, you're modeling taking a risk, you're modeling trying something, that vulnerability, and it's
passion,
really,
all of it. Yep.
Win-win situation.
Yep. Welcome back, everyone. We're so glad to have you. And today we have a special guest, David Getz. So welcome, David. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of actually getting to meet you in person this last January when we were at Illinois Music Ed Conference. And it was really nice to get to see you and hear about your new book and your presentation. So we're so glad to have you here today.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So could you tell us about yourself a little bit, your current role in music education, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I am a high school orchestra director. I've been in my current jobs this is my 11th year. I'm teaching at my alma mater in Central Illinois, which is a little, those first few years were a little interesting, eating lunch with my former high school teachers. But it's a really great place to teach. I really love my job. I was a cross country coach for 10 years. I just stopped that this past fall. In addition to my high school orchestra job, I also conduct a local youth orchestra in Peoria, Illinois. As you said, I just recently published a book with F-Flat Books, and I'm also a freelance composer, and I write a lot for my students. I've also written a full-length musical, and that's kind of one of my big hobbies. So,
wow. Well, that's awesome. So congratulations about the book. That's pretty exciting. I have to say I was lucky enough to be one of the pre-readers. So it was neat to see that coming together. So your book's about music composition. What is it? And, you mentioned that you are a composer yourself. Why did you decide that was something you wanted to introduce with your students? Where did that interest come from?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Theresa. It mainly came from when I, took the job. I was in my first year teaching, and I just had this moment of like, what experience would I like to give my students that I didn't have? I think that's probably what a lot of maybe young teachers think about, or why you go into the profession and maybe they see a lack. So I was interested in composition from a very early age. I was one of those students who, my piano teacher would give me an assignment and I would improvise on it and come back the next week and played it, completely differently. And thankfully that was encouraged and it was supported, and eventually led to me learning a lot more about theory from my high school piano teacher. I was taken from a local university. And I just really, enjoyed then learning how to orchestrate and write for the string orchestra. So this was, just being very ambitious as a teenager and teaching myself, mostly teaching myself. And, this is before YouTube also. So this was literally me I call it trial and error composing, because when I was 13, my parents got me my first DAW. I didn't even know what it stood for at the time, but I got this Power Tracks Pro Audio, which is a dinosaur program now. I don't know if any of our listeners would even know that program. But I would just spend hours down there. I would play something on my keyboard, see what the notation looked like, edit a few notes in there, play it back, edit a few more notes here. I mean, it was all just this trying to figure out the sound I liked. And so when I finally I had a very kind of watershed experience after my junior year of high school, when I went to a summer composition institute, it was called, at Illinois Wesleyan University. It was run by Dr. Mario Pelusi, who's a key figure in the book I ended up writing. But it was a week-long camp where, every day you were learning about music composition, you were learning about theory, and then on Friday you performed, or you had performers actually play a piece you had been writing through the week. So when I got my first job as at the high school, I just thought like, hey, what if I took that experience that I had over a week of a summer and I kind of stretched it out over a semester, and gave students a place to come to learn about composition, so practice these different techniques, but then ultimately I always saw it ending with a performance of those compositions, because that's what made the most impact on me as a composer, is when I transitioned from hearing just a computer play my stuff to a real human being. And so that's really the impetus for the book, is to try to get more teachers, or just anybody, to see the joy that composing music can bring you, and how I really do think it unlocks that student creativity.
Yeah, that's great. And so help us understand, like, what does that look like in the classroom? How do you encourage people to do music composition in the classroom?
Yeah, so I'll kind of answer that in two parts, because I did start this group as an after school club. So, this was students who did not sign up for the class. This wasn't a class they're offered during the day. So it was students who were going out of their way to spend time after school learning about this. And so, I was working with very eager students who wanted to have this opportunity. So that was, it's not hard to get them excited and motivated to want to learn about composition. Over actually a year after COVID, I've really kind of changed my philosophy of what the classroom, the orchestra classroom especially, kind of looks like. And I've brought a lot of those ideas from my Composers Guild. That's the name we kind of gave ourselves. And I've started kind of slowly introducing them into my general orchestra classroom. So we now I have my students actually do a quarterly project every quarter, where they're basically working on it comes from the standards, but it's basically always a creative outlet. The project is designed to kind of flip the classroom. I actually call it the Mr. Getz He Can Be Taught project. So they actually are teaching me. I basically say, I'm going to plead ignorance. I don't know anything about music. Your job is to teach me. And so what I tell them is, and this is what I try to model, is use your creative strengths to bring about the content, right? And so I'm a composer, so I write a lot of songs for my class. My students are probably tired of hearing me sing and badly rap at them over the years, but it's what helps me learn. What gets me excited. It gets me inspired. And so I try to have them do that as well. So it's a different approach when I'm working with my composition students, who are, really there by choice. And then also trying to like surprise orchestra students by, hey, look, you actually can compose and be creative in this way as well.
Yeah.
I love that you're giving those students who have the interest, or who like think they might have the interest in composition, a space. Because, you were saying, oh, well, my private piano teacher helped me and I figured this out on my own. And imagine if you had a space, right? To do that and to come do that with other people. I think that's really special. And with your after school group, do you find, you said you teach the orchestra. Do you have students who aren't in orchestra ever join or show interest in that kind of a after school club?
I would actually say most of my students are not orchestra students. I'd say most of them actually come from the band. We have a really big band program at my school, thriving band program. Really good. I mean, for a school our size, we have a tremendous fine arts program in terms of attendance and quality and all sorts of things. So I also have gotten students who have joined who are not in any of the big three ensembles. So it's been really nice, again, to create that space that just draws people in. And now actually, even the last 3 years, I've been teaching AP music theory. And so I'm also, again, sneaking some of my Composers Guild things into that class as well. Those poor kids. But I've had students now that are not in any of those ensembles that are signing up to take music theory class. And when I do like an exit interview at the end of the year, it's always like, this was one of my favorite experiences. This, helped me learn so much about the music that I love to listen to. And so it all goes back to that unlocking that student creativity. And I think it all starts it doesn't have to be composition, but you have to find something to unlock that.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly it. Like, try something that is passionate that's passionate for yourself, and see where it goes. I think, like, I tried a genius hour project with a second grade teacher. Like, that's not a big general music thing to do, but I learned how to take a lot of those aspects into my instruction and changing the learning experience. So again, it was just like, we just talk about, like, there's not really one right or wrong way to do it. It's just get involved, try something that you're passionate about, and see where it goes. And the more and more you do it, you learn all these different ways where they can trickle in, good teaching and stuff. So yeah, it's just hearing how your journey is like. I connect to that because I did those things too, and it's amazing where it goes.
Yeah. So give us a look in, like, what's it like?
Into like the Composers Guild?
Sure. Yeah, we can start there. Either way.
So this Composers Guild has that's a whole origin story that I kind of tell in the book. But the short version is I introduced the club in 2012, called it the Composers Guild, realized that it was dangerously close to a term that was in the Skyrim video game that was very popular at the time. Oh. So I had about 30 kids show up to my first meeting thinking we were going to play Skyrim and it was going to be a video game. And the next meeting I had 4 kids. And so it was a good lesson for me that, like, hey, if 700% of your students quit after the first workshop, don't give up. Just keep going. Or maybe, research your titles before you put posters around the school. So that's kind of a funny aside. But so what I basically wanted to do is emulate Dr. Pelusi's model that he was doing with the Wesleyan camp. And that's actually where I ended up going for undergrad. And so when I started doing the Composers Guild, I reached back out to Dr. Pelusi, and he actually ended up bringing students from Illinois Wesleyan and playing my students' composition. So it was a great full circle experience. Mm-hmm. And we just celebrated our 10th anniversary concert this last month, and Dr. Pelusi came back for that again. So that's a whole great story in and of itself. But again, this kind of the structure of the Composers Guild is we usually meet about once a week, and it's for about an hour after school. And I basically just do a workshop. So I'll take some element of composition. Maybe it's form, maybe it's melody writing, maybe it's learning basic harmonic structure. And I'll lecture for 25, 30 minutes. I'll play examples, and then I'll try to get kids either into note flight or into flat or MuseScore, whatever program they like to work with, or even some that just like to write by hand. And we try to just do those things. And at the beginning of my book, I outline a principle I call the Lego principle, where basically when kids start playing with Legos, no one reads the box. No one looks up well, what is a Lego? How does it go with another Lego? I wonder what I should. You just open the box, and kids can be 2 years old and they just dive in and start. Well, they're probably going to eat them, so you have to be careful. But they're going to start putting them together, and nobody really cares, what they do with them. And I really, with the Composers Guild, I try to battle I call it the genius fallacy, that you have to be a genius to be a composer. You have to be, writing operas when you're 12 and symphonies when you're 15. And so, we're just going to treat music like a box of Legos. And there's 12 pitches. There's a bunch of rhythm combinations. Let's just put them together. It doesn't have to be good. It's actually probably not going to be good. But who cares? I just recently saw on Instagram, someone posted, what if in art class, you only had students replicate the Mona Lisa? If all they were doing was trying to just replicate these master works, you'd get so frustrated with your contribution because it would be so far from what Da Vinci did. And so I try to just really get kids to say, don't worry about writing like Beethoven. Don't worry about writing, like all these masters. Just put notes together. The more you do it, kind of like me, when I was just learning on my first, notation program, just learn by putting things together, take away what you don't like, leave what you like, and see where it goes. And so the amount of students who have come in with no composition experience whatsoever, and in about 3 or 4 months have put together a 2-minute composition for a trio of instruments, it really just blows your mind.
Yeah, and I can imagine the just-in-time learning for that is you've got them. Like when they try something and they're like, I like this, but I wish I could figure out how to make this end well or whatever. Like I'm sure you can swoop in and say, oh, a cadence, or, you can kind of, you've got their attention because they've got something that they want to complete, Is that accurate?
Well, yeah. And I think this then goes into, working with the general orchestra population, or like oftentimes after a workshop, I'll tell the students, like, in your next band rehearsal, see if you notice this happening. And then they'll come back the next day and like, oh my gosh, Mr. Getz, like I heard a perfect authentic cadence, or we ended with a plagal cadence, or, I was able to follow this, phrase structure. It is a rondo. Well, maybe it's because in the title, but yeah, like now I understand what a rondo is, And so you can just see there's that excitement of like, I've been playing music my whole life, but now that I actually know how a composer thinks, I really see it, not just in my part, but now I'm able to listen to the French horns and, oh, they're playing the counter melody, or I'm listening to the cello section. Oh, they're playing the bass line. And so it's those conversations that are really fun to have in the general classroom once students know a little bit about composing. And now that I've been doing this with my, students in the general orchestra now for the last couple of years, I can talk to them. I mean, we're not going as deep as in the Composers Guild, but we're able to have those conductor composer conversations rather than just teacher student conversations.
Yeah. And doesn't that speak to exactly why we should be doing this? Right? Because you're taking kids from just simply, like we said, replicating somebody else's music, replicating the Mona Lisa, to talking about what they did, why they did it, what these various pieces mean. It's taking the musical experience so much deeper, even if you're still only kind of skimming the surface with composition, but you're making that overall experience much, much more valuable for the students.
Well, and to credit both of you, I mean, I read your book a year and a half ago, and that idea of like, passing the baton is right. It's flipping the classroom around where kids feel empowered to make that declaration and say, I understand what the composer is doing. And they're the ones sitting in the middle of the viola section, right? So that's going to have a lot more sway over how the piece sounds when the violas understand that they're playing the third of the triad. And, it's the voice is leading this way and they have to resolve down because they're on the suspension, right? Now, that might be higher level than seventh or eighth graders care to get. But, for us as teachers, when we see them making those connections, it gives us that kind of, like we did it moment as teachers that we all strive for.
Exactly. Because it's not you sitting there telling them that information. They figured it out for themselves. And then what we hope is when they're playing something else later down the line without us in front of them, they can still make those same connections.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love it. Look, sorry, Kathryn, I keep just like jumping in because I'm so excited about the topic. So can you tell us like what it looks like in the orchestra classroom then? Like what are some examples of things?
Yeah, so my orchestra classroom is a pretty. I'd like to think it's unique, and actually now that I've read your book and I followed a lot of the people you suggested on social media, I'm realizing there is a whole community of people out there who are really passionate about inspiring creativity in their students, and so your book was kind of foundational for me to kind of go, oh good, I'm not alone, because I mean as a young teacher I was very influenced by two things in my life. I was homeschooled through 8th grade. So I didn't go into public school till 9th grade. And I've been an athlete my whole life and played sports. I ran track and field and cross country in college, and I coached for so many years. And so I've really kind of seen myself now after kind of a decade of teaching, as much less of an orchestra teacher and more of an orchestra coach. Like I have the same kids every year. It's my team. We have 4 concerts a year. So that's basically 4 like games. And then we have off season, right? And in the off season, you train and you kind of rehab, and then you get psyched up for another concert season. And, we call the 7 days before a concert Shark Week. That's the day you're really focused and trying to put everything together. Because even in a sports team, you can't go 100% every single day. I mean, everybody says, coach, give 110% every day, but you really can't. Long term, your body's going to break down. Emotionally, you got to be able to pace yourself. And so I've really taken a lot of my experience as an athlete and taken that to kind of pacing out how my class works. I keep way too many statistics on my students, and I have Google Sheets for days on data that, if you're a spreadsheet geek, you'd love to nerd out on it. I can show you that sometime. But then my homeschool side comes in, and I think, okay, like when I was homeschooled, my mom was an incredible teacher. There was 8 kids. I was second of 8. So there was a lot of independence on my part. I had to do a lot of my learning was self-paced, self-motivated. My mom trusted me to get my work done, and I was eager to do it because I kind of learned to love learning. And I think that's something that when I then went into the public school environment, I realized, wow, like this is not what everybody's experience is towards the learning process. Now, especially when it came to music, that was kind of my niche. So I really, that was my space to really kind of cook. But then when I came in as a music teacher, I was like, okay, I want to take these two things that probably most teachers might not have an experience in, being homeschooled, being a high level athlete. What have I learned from those two things, and how can I bring them into the classroom? So I started doing things, in my first few years that were very experimental. I was doing them purely because I just thought they were good ideas. And then I read a book like yours and I'm like, oh, good. It's backed up by research. Like, I'm not crazy. Like there's actually people out there that also think this is a good idea. So, just the concept, a few things that come to mind, like we do a lot of we call them independent practice days. I don't conduct. Literally everybody is practicing on their own for 40 minutes. I have like timers on the board that are kind of guiding them through a practice section, trying to teach them good practice habits. And I have a co-teacher too. We just wander around the classroom and can pop in and do one-on-one conversations with the students. I started doing, these creative projects quarterly. I rehearse so much less than when I was a young teacher. And actually 3 years ago, my co-teacher and I gave a presentation. It was the year that Allstate was canceled due to COVID, but we called it Less Rehearsals, Better Concerts. Because I found when we reduced the number of time we were actually rehearsing, when we rehearsed, students were very focused. And when we were just rehearsing every single day, it just, it was just part of the routine. It was fun. We had a great time. But then I realized I was getting the same amount of work done, whether I was rehearsing, 40 times in between each concert or 20 times. It was the same, we were getting the same product in the end. So it really kind of freed me up to try a lot more of these creative composition things, creative independent things. And I really think my program is better for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember Frank Battisti, he's a band guy. He once said something like, oh, you all have too much rehearsal time. And everyone was like, oh my goodness, how dare he? But he was kind of coming to your point that if with less time, you focus more and you can really get things done.
Well, and that wasn't by choice, Theresa. I learned that experience by trial by fire.
Yeah.
We had a guest quartet coming in from Boston to play with us. And I think it was like an October concert. And we kept emailing them for the music. And I remember it came in 19 school days before our concert. And the first piece I pulled out of the manila envelope was in 5 flats. And I was like, so after I, picked my job up off the floor, tied it back on, I was like, all right, we're going to do this. And we did it like in 19 school. Was it as perfect as if we had the whole time? Probably not. But it made me realize I was too focused on just what had always been done, right? Or in orchestra, you rehearse. And it made me realize because in that time when I was waiting for the music, I literally had no music to hand out to the students. That's when I started doing a lot of this stuff by necessity. And then I realized oh my goodness, if I did only have 19 rehearsals, I can make a great concert out of that. So what can I do with all this other time? So yeah, don't think that I just sat down and decided to do this without a traumatic story behind it.
Okay. Well, at least somebody else can feel better about knowing that you've experienced it and it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I know we've talked about, hinted at, or really talked about how this all empowers our students. But if you think about it from the learner experience, I go into my orchestra rehearsals and I sit and watch you at with the baton, and we do our rehearsals every day. To I think what you're describing now, what does the learner experience look like? What are they doing differently? I guess. Like my composition students or orchestra students? I guess I know your orchestra students I think your orchestra students are the ones I'm thinking of. The ones that you said, it's not going to be all rehearsal all the time now. So what does that look like for them?
Yeah. And I think a lot of it goes into, I've thought kind of the word that keeps coming to my mind is just culture.
Mm-hmm.
And when students walk into your classroom, they sense the culture, right? And especially freshmen coming in, they're trying to figure that out because they're in a new building. They're with 18-year-olds who seem gigantic to them, and so there's all these new things, and so they want to as quickly as possible assimilate, right? Because kids just want to say, okay, what is the status quo here? I want to get as close to that as possible. Now, again, you have your outliers that are going to always push the boundaries, but I really want to try to do things that establish that culture where kids walk into my classroom and they feel, we call it a creative atmosphere. And so when they walk into the orchestra room, they feel like, oh, this is a place where I can be creative. Because from my experience, when I came from homeschool and walked into high school, there was so many places where I felt creativity is not safe. Like it's not okay to just do whatever you think is a good idea because it's fun. Now I did it anyway. And I, shocked most of my students in those first few weeks as a little freshman. But I really want in my orchestra that kids know that this is a safe place to be creative. And because there's upperclassmen that they can look at and that trust me that I'm not, completely crazy, say, hey, we're still going to make great concerts. We're still going to do awesome things, but you're going to become an independent musician if you stay in my orchestra for 4 years. And I say that all the time. I think, what builds a culture is common verbiage. And so we say all the time, like when I say, what does Mr. Getz want you to be? They all now like independent musician, right? It's just like they know that's my expectation, right? And we also say you always want to work hard at having fun. So whenever we're working hard, it's like, okay, if you want to have the most fun, you need to be working hard to do it. And I tell them, like, whenever you walk into any class, you should identify who is working the hardest and who is having the most fun. And I tell them, I always try to be both people. So that when you walk into my classroom, you're going to say, wow, Mr. Getz is working really hard here in the orchestra. Like, look at all the stuff he's doing. Look at all these crazy spreadsheets and graphs he's made that show me I increased by 0.6% from last year, right? But look how much fun he's having. Holy cow. Like he just wrote a 5-minute hip hop piece about note reading. Like, why would he do that unless he really enjoys what he's doing? And so I think that's then why when we started doing these individual projects, I told students, okay, we're switching this around. Like, I want to watch your project and go, wow, they are having fun learning about key signatures. Like, I mean, I can't tell you how many different ways I've had people teach me about finger patterns on the D string, or where are the half steps in a major scale. And I mean, some kids are going outside and taking their lawnmower and drawing patterns in their yard and then taking a drone and filming it from, 30 feet up. I mean, that's the kind of things that they'll remember when they're 40.
Yep.
And they won't remember the distance formula or, because I can't even remember the distance formula. But, I remember those. I remember in high school, my teacher then let me take one of my pieces and sight read it with the orchestra. I mean, that was just amazing to me. Mm-hmm. And so I want to create a space where my students, yes, they sign up for orchestra. So we're going to do orchestra and we're going to do it really well. We're going to be really good musicians. We're going to give great performances. But to make you an independent musician, I don't want to teach you to be a rehearsal parrot, mm-hmm. right? And so if all we're doing every day is just rehearsing, as soon as you graduate from my program, you're probably not going to have a conductor that every time you want to make music is going to stand up there and keep time and plunk your part out on the piano. You know how to take a piece of music, figure out the key, figure out the finger patterns on your instrument, figure out the tempo, audiate the rhythms, boom, you can play it. And so that's ultimately what, it's getting the freshmen to buy into that culture. Mm-hmm. And then having seniors in the program that they can look to and say, oh, I'm in a safe place to grow into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so important. It really is. So if someone listening is kind of inspired by what you're saying and they want to try some things, what could they implement in their classroom tomorrow or next week or just sometime soon? What would be like a nice step in?
Well, I'll answer that first from the composition standpoint.
Excellent. Yeah.
And that would be to attack that genius fallacy. And I think we hold up the composers of our music as these, unattainable Greek gods that live up on Olympus, and the music comes to them and then they bring it down the mountain to us mortals. And we do our best to appease them with our, rehearsals. And because I mean, that's how I kind of thought about music. And so when I was trying to compose, I was trying to compose like Chopin, and I was trying to compose like Brahms, because I'm like, that's what composition is. It's writing these master works that are going to get played for centuries. And to show them. And that's why I really try to compose a lot for my students, so they remember like, oh, Mr. Getz is a living, breathing human being who does a lot of strange things, but he can write music. I'm a human being that does some strange things, so I can probably write music. And so I think that's the kind of one of the first things. And how we talk about composers, it's programming live composers. It's, just creating those conversations that you don't have to be a dead white European male to write music, and go from there. And so I think just starting with the way we talk about composition and writing music. The last analogy I'll use, that I put this in the book, is imagine an English class where you only read books and you never gave a research paper. And your reason was, well, I don't think my students are going to be novelists. I don't think they're going to be journalists. So why would I give them this assignment? It's like that. No English class functions that way. So I don't think any music class, if we want our musicians to be literate, that means they read and write, not professional level, not like Beethoven, but they can do it. And once they start doing it, they're going to want to keep doing it, because I do believe it unlocks that creativity. But the second part of that then would be, the culture is going to be dictated by the leader in the classroom, and the teacher is that leader. And so if they see the teacher taking creative risks, they're going to want to do that too. So, I mean, I would say all this, like, this really changed when it was January of 2016, when I surprised my students the first day of the semester with a spontaneous hip hop song that I had written over winter break. And I had like delayed, I wrote it in GarageBand so it wouldn't start playing for like 5 minutes when I hit play. So I just started class like normal. And then all of a sudden, 5 minutes in, this beat dropped and I just started rapping. And my class has never been the same, because my students, I just took them so far by surprise. Most of them probably haven't recovered. But since then, they saw, okay, this is a place where creative adventures can happen. And they've been happening more and more and more since then, with the students at the forefront of that. So I would just say to any teacher starting tomorrow, think about what you're good at. And the kids need to see that. So, if you are really good at needlepoint, do you have any of your work hanging in your room? If you're a really good artist, have the students seen you draw? Because the kids aren't going to be vulnerable and show you their creative side unless the teacher's led by example here. So I'd say that's kind of the practical first step you can do. And then the second step would be buy my book and implement the workshops that I do. So
that's very attainable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the way you said, to figure out what your creative thing is, because you don't want to see me attempt a hip hop song. That would not
You don't want to see me either. And unfortunately they did. So
yeah. Or I guess maybe I should say, I know that I wouldn't be comfortable, trying that at least first, but there's plenty of other ways that I could see myself being creative. And that I do see myself sharing that with students, that it would be something that was more my speed. So it was bringing Theresa to the classroom and not trying to emulate somebody else. So I think that's an important distinction. It can be anything that you're showing your creative vulnerability.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Well, I know you talked a lot about community earlier, because you talked about, having, I don't know if the word you said slogans, but you had little sayings that, you say to your kids, and when they leave your classroom, they know them. Is there any other tip to share with somebody when they want to, build a strong community that you would suggest?
Yeah, I would say, now a lot of mine, I will confess, I'm very comfortable being spontaneous. I'm more comfortable getting the microphone in front of 100 people than I am with like talking one-on-one to a stranger. But so if I would have sat down and probably thought a little more about this, I when I was a younger teacher, I probably would have had some better ideas. Usually what would happen is it'd be like 5 minutes before the bell would ring, and I would just think, oh, I'm going to do this today. it's going to be a great idea. And I would just run with it at, 100 miles an hour. And, they weren't always great. But I would say for someone who's really thinking about what is the culture in your classroom, the first thing is, do you know the culture in your classroom? Like, have you actually talked to your students? Have you had conversation? Have you appointed student leaders who you trust their input to give you feedback? And I started 6 years ago now. I created an orchestra like student council. We call ourselves the grand staff. Pause for rim shot. Yes. But it's one student from each grade level in both of my orchestras. So 8 students total. And we meet once a month, and they're my think tank. And I tell them, like, I don't want to be coming up with all these ideas for the orchestra. I want them to come from you. And like, I want to, if I do something, I want feedback on, is this well received, or could this be changed better for next year? So I've been doing that now for several years. That's given me really valuable feedback. And then I think if you pulled maybe 5 random students out of your classroom and said, what are the 3 most common sayings that, Mr. Getz says in class? Like, what are the 3 things you'll remember that he would say all the time? That's your culture shaping moment right there. Like, that, whatever they say, whether you meant to or not, that's the culture you've created. So thinking about what are those things that you do say all the time? What are those little inside jokes that are going to pop in their head? The one most memorable one for me, I say all the time, is, are your ducks in a row? Just meaning are you organized? I said that so much that one day I came down into my room and there was a duck in my room, a live duck. So you got to be careful what you actually say, because your seniors will prank you with it. So now I always want to say your deep dish pizza needs to be in a row or something, something that you want left in your classroom. But, just now when I say that, everybody knows oh, Mr. Getz wants us to be organized. That's important. That's an important value in this group is, are you digitally organized? Is your music in order? Is your instrument in order? All those things, are your ducks in a row? So I would say, talk to your students, figure out what your culture is, and then figure out what would those sayings be that you would want any of your students, if someone asked them, what are the top 3 things here, they should hopefully all say the same thing. Start and then try to get there.
Yeah, I love that. So many good ideas. All right, somebody is ready to take step 2, right? They want to find you. They want to learn more about your work. They want to buy your book. How are they going to do that?
Well, my book is available through F-Flat Books. So go to F-Flat Books. You can search for my name. The book is Unlocking Student Creativity Through Composition. I would encourage you while you're there to stop and check out all their other amazing stuff, because F-Flat Books is absolutely fantastic. I know most of us, at least in this conversation, are familiar with their work, but it's really worth your time to see the great stuff they have there. And then if you want to get to know me personally, I have a website, www.davidgetzcreative. That's Getz with a Z. So davidgetzcreative.com. I do have a blog that I don't write on near as much as I would like to. But I have a few blog posts out there. One I just most recently wrote was about my experiences as a coach and an athlete and how they impact the music classroom. It's an example of what I write about. And I'm also on Instagram at David Getz Creative. And the musical that I wrote that came out in 2018 is theruthmusical.com. That kind of also shows you what I do as a composer. So
very cool. We'll make sure that we put links to all those in the show notes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. It was nice to get to talk to you for a while, and so glad to hear everything that you're doing.
Yeah, this was a blast. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
We'd also love for you to consider sharing this podcast with a friend and leaving a positive review. That's one of the best ways to get this message to new listeners.